We Munsters are a very old family.
They didn't invite me? Why, I've never been so insulted since the day I died.
The Munsters were full of spooky fun on screen, but behind the scenes there were secrets, surprises, and shocking twists. From hidden rivalries to real coffins, these 20 incredible facts reveal the untold story of TV's favorite monster family. 20. The original matriarch wasn't Lily Munster. When you think of the Munsters, you probably picture Lily Munster, the elegant vampire mom with her long black and white hair. But here's a shocking fact: Lily wasn't the original Munster mom. Before the show was officially released, the first Munster mother was named Phoebe Munster, played by Joan Marshall. In the unaired pilot episode, Phoebe looked very different from Lily. She had dark hair, a spooky expression, and a Gothic-style dress, making her look too much like Morticia Addams from The Addams Family, which aired at the same time. The producers worried that viewers would confuse the two shows, so they decided to replace Phoebe with a brand new character. That's when they cast Yvonne De Carlo as Lily Munster, completely transforming the role into the funny, warm-hearted mother fans love today. Unlike Phoebe, Lily had great chemistry with Herman Munster, creating one of the best monster couples in TV history. She balanced out Herman's goofiness, rolling her eyes at his silly antics but always standing by his side. The decision to change the Munster mom helped make the show unique, ensuring that the Munsters wasn't just a copy of the Addams Family. Could you imagine the Munsters without Lily? Probably not. But here's another mind-blowing fact. Herman Munster wasn't actually green. You won't believe the real colors they used on set. 19. The Munsters wore blue and purple makeup. Many people imagine Herman Munster as a big green Frankenstein-like monster, but he wasn't green at all. Since The Munsters was filmed in black and white, the actors actually wore blue and purple makeup to make their skin look just right on camera. TV technology in the 1960s worked differently from today. If the makeup artists had painted Herman green, he would have looked too dark and unnatural in black and white. To fix this, they painted his face blue and purple, which appeared pale and ghostly on screen. For the actors, this was a huge hassle. Fred Gwynne, Herman Munster, had to sit for hours every morning while his entire face and hands were covered in thick blue paint. His giant boots made walking difficult, and under the hot studio lights he sweated so much that the makeup started melting. By the time filming ended each day, he had to scrub his face hard just to get it all off. But did you know that the Munster mansion wasn't actually built for the show? The house at 1313 Mockingbird Lane had a hidden history that will shock you. 18. The Munster mansion was used in other TV shows. The creepy Munster mansion at 1313. Mockingbird Lane looked like the perfect haunted house, but here's something most people don't know. It wasn't built for the Munsters. Long before the show existed, this Hollywood house was already being used in movies and TV shows. In fact, it was first built in 1946 for a movie called So Goes My Love. Over the years, the house appeared in different films and shows, but when the Munsters started, the producers decided to recycle the old set instead of building a brand new house. To make the mansion look spookier, they added cobwebs, broken fences, dead trees, and dark paint to turn it into the Munsters' haunted home. 17. The Munster coach was a $20,000 custom car. If you've ever seen the Munsters, then you probably remember Herman Munster's crazy-looking car, the Munster coach. This wasn't just any ordinary car. It was a one-of-a-kind custom vehicle built just for the show. The Munster coach was created by George Barris, one of Hollywood's most famous car designers. He also built the 1960s Batmobile and other legendary TV and movie cars. The Munster coach was built by combining 3 Model T Fords and stretching them out to create a super-long, spooky-looking hot rod. It took over 500 hours to build, and at the time it cost $20,000, which is over $200,000 in today's money. But if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear about Grandpa Munster's car. It was even weirder. Believe it or not, Grandpa's car was made from a real coffin. 16. Grandpa's Dragula car was made from a real coffin. Yes, you saw that right. Grandpa Munster's car was actually built from a real coffin. The eerie vehicle, called Dragula, was another wild creation by George Barris, the same designer behind the Munster coach. Dragula looked like a vampire's dream ride, long, sleek, and completely built around a fiberglass coffin. It had a golden body, a huge engine, and pipes shaped like vampire fangs. The idea was to make a spooky drag racing car that Grandpa Munster could speed around in. But here's where it gets really crazy. The TV network didn't want Barris to use a real coffin because they thought it was too creepy for audiences. In some states, it was even illegal to buy a coffin unless it was for a funeral. To work around this, Barris found an unused fiberglass coffin from a funeral home supplier and used that instead. But the Munsters didn't just swap out props. One of the main characters was replaced without most fans even noticing. 15. The show had two Marilyn Munsters. If you've watched The Munsters, you probably remember Marilyn Munster, the only family member who looked completely normal. But did you know that two different actresses played Marilyn? At the start of the show, Marilyn was played by Beverly Owen, but she left after 13 episodes because she was homesick and wanted to move back to New York to be with her fiancé. Even though she was sad to leave, she chose love over Hollywood and walked away from the show. Instead of removing Marilyn's character, the producers secretly replaced her with Pat Priest. They didn't change anything about her looks or personality, so most fans didn't even realize the switch had happened. But The Munsters wasn't always the show we know today. The very first pilot episode was completely different. 14. The unseen pilot episode was completely different. Before The Munsters officially aired, the producers filmed a test episode known as a pilot to see if the show would work. This unaired pilot, called My Fair Munster, had a lot of differences from the final show. First, the pilot was filmed in full color, even though the show later switched to black and white. The bright colors made the Munster family less spooky, taking away the classic monster movie feel. Second, some of the actors were different. Lily Munster wasn't played by Yvonne DiCarlo. Instead, a different actress, Joan Marshall, played her as Phoebe Munster before the character was changed. Eddie Munster was also played by a different child actor who gave him a meaner, bratty personality. 13. The Munsters versus the Addams Family, a spooky rivalry. In 1964, The Munsters and the Addams Family premiered in the same year, creating an instant TV showdown. Both shows had strange, funny families, but while The Munsters featured classic movie monsters, the Addams Family was all about dark humor and gothic charm. Surprisingly, The Munsters had higher ratings than the Addams Family. Audiences loved Herman's goofiness, Grandpa's crazy inventions, and the family's attempts to fit into normal life. However, while The Munsters was a hit during its run, the Addams Family had a longer cultural legacy, with movies, cartoons, and multiple reboots keeping it alive for decades. Even today, fans still debate which show was better. Do you prefer the wacky warmth of the Munsters or the eerie elegance of the Addams Family? One thing's for sure, both shows had unforgettable theme songs. 12. The Munster theme song was Grammy-nominated. One of the most recognizable parts of the Munsters was its catchy, spooky theme song. The jazzy instrumental track, composed by Jack Marshall, was so good that it was nominated for a Grammy Award in 1965 for Best Instrumental Theme. Even though it didn't win, the song became a classic, appearing in movies, commercials, and even modern music samples. Decades later, people still recognize the theme, even if they've never watched The Munsters. While the music was fun, playing Herman Munster wasn't. The costume was a nightmare, especially because of his gigantic boots. 11. Fred Gwynn's Herman Munster boots were 10 pounds each. Playing Herman Munster wasn't easy, especially when you had to wear massive boots that weighed 10 pounds each. Fred Gwynn, already 6'5", had to appear even taller, so the producers gave him thick-soled boots that made him 7'6" on screen. While they made him look huge and intimidating, they were a nightmare to walk in. Standing in those boots for hours left Gwynn in serious pain, and by the end of the day he soaked his feet in ice water to recover. On top of that, his monster suit was hot, and his heavy makeup took hours to apply and remove. Despite the discomfort, Gwyn brought Herman to life with humor and warmth, making him one of TV's most lovable dads. But just as the Munsters was hitting its stride, something unexpected happened. It was cancelled after just 2 seasons 10. The show was cancelled for a surprising reason. Even though The Munsters was a hit with audiences, it was suddenly cancelled after only 2 seasons. The reason? The rise of color TV. In 1966, ABC introduced Batman, a bright, action-packed color series that instantly grabbed audiences' attention. Meanwhile, The Munsters was still in black and white, making it look outdated compared to newer, colorful shows. Instead of investing in colorizing The Munsters, the network chose to end it. But the Munster family wasn't gone for good. Shortly after, they returned in a full-color movie, giving fans their first look at Herman in color. 9. Munster Go Home was the family's first color appearance. After The Munsters ended, fans got one more chance to see their favorite monster family, this time in full color. In 1966, the movie Munster Go Home was released, showing Herman, Lily, and the gang in color for the first time. Fans were shocked. Most assumed Herman Munster was gray, but in reality, he was bright green. The movie follows the Munsters as they travel to England, where Herman inherited a spooky castle. Of course, chaos followed, leading to hilarious monster fun. The film also introduced a new Marilyn Munster, played by Debbie Watson, instead of Pat Priest, which confused some fans. Even though Munster Go Home, it wasn't a big hit at the time, it later became a fan favorite and remains a fun way to see the Munsters in full color. 8. 1313. Mockingbird Lane exists in real life. The Munsters mansion was one of the most recognizable homes in TV history. It had tall, Gothic windows, dark wooden doors, iron gates, and spooky decorations everywhere. The outside looked like it belonged in a classic monster movie, and the inside was just as eerie, with cobwebs, old furniture, and mysterious hidden rooms. While this was just a set on a Hollywood studio lot, a real-life version of the Munster mansion was actually built in Texas. A fan named Sandra McKee loved the show so much that she decided to recreate the entire house, making it a perfect replica. She spent years studying every detail of the original mansion, ensuring that everything from the furniture to Grandpa's underground lab looked exactly the same. Today, this house in Waxahachie, Texas, is a huge attraction for fans of the show. Visitors can take tours, see the recreated rooms, and experience what it would be like to live in the Munster mansion. But while the mansion was home to the Munster family, they weren't the only ones living there. Their pet dragon, Spot, also called the mansion home, and he was no ordinary pet. 7. The Munsters' pet dragon was a mechanical marvel. Most families have a dog, cat, or maybe even a bird, but the Munsters had a fire-breathing dragon named Spot. Spot lived under the stairs in the mansion and was known for blowing fire and scaring off visitors. Despite being a regular part of the show, Spot was rarely seen in full view. Most of the time, only his glowing red eyes, sharp teeth, or long tail would appear. This wasn't because the show wanted to keep him a mystery. It was because building a full-size dragon for TV would have been too expensive. Instead, Spot was created using special effects, smoke machines, and mechanical puppetry. His roars and sounds were made from real animal noises, including recordings of lions and alligators. The show's crew also used wires and hidden levers to move his tail or make smoke rise whenever Spot was breathing fire. Even though Spot wasn't real, he became one of the most memorable pets in TV history. But the Munsters had another pet that many people forget about, a talking raven that lived inside their cuckoo clock. 6. The talking raven was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. A weird cuckoo clock hung on the Munsters' wall, but instead of a regular bird emerging, there was a talking raven named Charlie. Unlike other pets, he could actually communicate, usually cracking snarky comments and rebuffing the Munsters. Nevermore, an allusion to Edgar Allan Poe's renowned poem, The Raven, was Charlie's favorite phrase. A guy visits a mystery-talking raven in the poem, who merely repeats the word nevermore over and over. The Munsters included Charlie as a small homage to Poe's well-known work, as they loved combining eerie and humorous components. Charlie's voice was supplied by Mel Blanc, one of the best voice performers in the business, which adds even more appeal. Charlie was a small part of the show, but he added a fun, spooky touch to the Munster mansion, just like Spot the Dragon. The show was filled with hilarious, creative details, which is why it's still loved by fans all over the world today. 5. The Munsters took over toy stores with a huge merchandising empire. When the Munsters became a hit, it didn't just stay on TV, it took over stores everywhere. Fans could buy Munster-themed toys, lunchboxes, board games, comic books, and even Halloween costumes. One of the most popular toys was a miniature Hot Wheels version of the Munster coach, the long, spooky hot rod that Herman Munster drove. It was so popular that people still collect it today. But that wasn't all. Kids in the 1960s could get their hands on Munster dolls, board games featuring 1313 Mockingbird Lane, and even lunchboxes so they could bring their favorite monster family to school. Even today, the Munsters merchandise is highly collectible. Some original toys and memorabilia are worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. If you ever find an old Munster toy at a garage sale, you might be holding a rare piece of TV history. Up next is a shocking behind-the-scenes secret. While fans were having fun collecting Munster toys, the actors were dealing with a nightmare on set. Their costumes weren't just uncomfortable, they were brutal. You won't believe what they had to endure. 4. The cast struggled in their uncomfortable costumes. Playing a monster might look fun, but for the actors in the Munsters, it was a real challenge. Their costumes and makeup were so uncomfortable that filming the show sometimes felt like torture. Fred Gwynne, who played Herman Munster, had the toughest job. His suit was thick, heavy, and extremely hot, making him sweat constantly under the bright studio lights. His giant 10-pound boots made it difficult to walk, and by the end of the day his feet were so sore that he had to soak them in ice water. Al Lewis, who played Grandpa Munster, had to wear huge fake teeth that made eating nearly impossible. During meal breaks, he couldn't even chew food properly and had to drink his meals through a straw. Yvonne DiCarlo, who played Lily Munster, also had a difficult time with her costume. Her wig was heavy and uncomfortable, and her tight, stiff dress made it hard to move. Even though she looked graceful and elegant on screen, she was actually incredibly uncomfortable the entire time. Even though the actors struggled every day, they gave incredible performances that made the Munsters unforgettable. But what happened after the show ended? Hollywood kept trying to bring the Munsters back, but not every attempt was a success. Up next is a wild ride through the many failed and surprising reboots of the Munsters. 3. The Munsters kept coming back with reboots and spin-offs. Even though the original Munster series ended after just 2 seasons, fans couldn't get enough of the spooky, funny family. Over the years, Hollywood kept trying to bring them back with different reboots and spin-offs. One of the first reboots was The Munsters Today, 1988 to 1991, which brought the Munster family back with a new cast. Surprisingly, this reboot lasted for 3 seasons, making it even longer than the original show. However, many fans felt that it didn't have the same charm as the original. In 2012, there was another attempt to reboot the show with Mockingbird Lane, a darker and more modern take on the Munsters, directed by Brian Fuller, who also created Hannibal and Pushing Daisies. This version was completely different from the lighthearted sitcom. It had a serious tone and a darker storyline. However, the pilot episode didn't impress audiences, and the show was canceled before it could even start. The most recent attempt was Rob Zombie's 2022 film The Munsters, which told the origin story of Herman and Lily Munster. This version of the story was colorful, quirky, and completely different from the original show. While some fans loved the new take, others felt that it strayed too far from what made the Munsters special. Up next is a moment that will inspire you, even if you've never watched The Munsters before. 2. Herman Munster gave one of the best TV speeches on acceptance. One of the most heartwarming and meaningful moments in The Munsters came from Herman Munster himself. In one famous scene, Herman gives his son, Eddie Munster, a life lesson about discrimination and acceptance. He tells Eddie, "It doesn't matter what someone looks like, it's what's inside that counts." This message was incredibly powerful, especially coming from a character who looked like a Frankenstein monster but had the heart of a loving, goofy dad. At a time when TV rarely talked about important social issues, the Munsters used humor and heart to deliver a lesson that still resonates decades later. Even though Herman was big, scary-looking, and different from the people around him, he always believed that everyone should be treated with kindness and respect. 1. The real ages of the Munsters were shocking. Herman Munster may have acted like a goofy dad, but he was actually over 150 years old. Despite working a regular job and living in the suburbs, he had been brought to life a long time ago, making him much older than he seemed. But Herman wasn't even the oldest Munster. Grandpa Munster was several hundred years old, because he was actually Count Dracula himself. He often mentioned famous historical events as if he had lived through them, and his knowledge of potions and spells came from centuries of vampire experience. Then there's Eddie Munster, the family's little werewolf. His wolf boy features weren't just for fun. They hinted that his monster lineage stretched back for generations. While he was still a kid, he came from a family of creatures who probably lived forever. Imagine what Eddie might look like 500 years later. The Munsters were full of surprises, both on and off screen. From secret cast changes to wild behind-the-scenes facts, this iconic show still amazes fans today. Like and subscribe for more classic TV secrets and spooky fun.